twist or took Aristotelian thought and made it the thought behind the developing countries and the developing orders and the developing people of what we today know as Christendom. And it was this thought that was the basis upon which all of Christendom after that time based its thinking upon until, and of course those were the glory days, the age of faith as it's called, until the modernists come along. And we'd have to go all the way back to the beginning of our series to discover that while we don't say that we know who the first modernist was, we began our discussion with René Descartes and with Thomas Hobbes and with John Locke. And now we are in week 2 of this exploration, and I am joined by my co-host for this edition, or this section of the Modern Wrong World Made Right, because we have different sections. We have The Modernists Were Wrong, that's today. We have Darwin Was Wrong, and that is co-hosted by Christopher Ferrara. We have Calvin Was Wrong, and that is co-hosted by Ryan Grant, the Latinist. We have, let's see here, Luther Was Wrong, and that is co-hosted by my buddy Steve Cunningham, the greatest living layperson apologist or practicer of apologetics that I know of. And certainly the greatest living non-lay person that I know of who is practicing the study and the teaching of Thomistic or scholastic philosophy is our dear friend from the St. Augustine Institute, Brother Andre Marie. So, brother, we are now fully enthralled into the world of Lent, having gone through Mardi Gras and Ash Wednesday last week, and now we're all into our first full week of Lent. So, Gaudium Quadragesima to you.
Oh, thank you very much, Michael. Happy Lent to you too. Happy penitential Lent.
Well, I'm having a penitential, and I'll have you know that what I have here in front of me, I'll just tap it on the mic. That is my glass of what remains of the homemade smoothie that I brought in because I'm on the liquid diet. Supplementing with just enough carbohydrates to get me by. Maybe I'll have a little half a bowl of pasta or a little half a cup of rice or something in the evening. It's difficult, but it really does make your mind work differently. Sometimes I'm not sure it's all good.
Well, my special Lenten penance today was reading about Immanuel Kant and Georg Hegel. That was my special penance.
So, and you'll understand all this in just a moment now. So last week we studied, in the brief time that we had, we did the two principal French philosophers who are responsible for the horrific errors in thought that are still being practiced by today's Frenchmen. And those were Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and we know him as Voltaire, and I forgot his real name.
François-Marie Arouet.
François-Marie Arouet. And this week now we're going to move on to the three principal German versions, or 18th century French philosophers, who are responsible today for much of the erroneous thought that has possessed the people of Germany. Certainly we can say that it influenced the thinking that led to the overthrow of Kaiser Wilhelm and monarchy in Germany, and led to the rise of German National Socialism. And we all know what happened after that. But we'll focus in today on 18th century, principally on 18th century philosophers and Immanuel Kant. So that is a penance having to read Kant, isn't it?
You bet. You bet.
Now, and in the following two episodes, we're going to get into a detailed exploration and hopefully educational journey on, okay, Mike and brother, so what? They had these guys that were bad philosophers, as you say. Who cares? Well, maybe the millions upon millions or tens of millions of people that are dead as a result of them, they might have cared. And I think we can say without reproach, brother, that the country of France, it flirted with trying to reconcile its errors in 1860s, 1870s or so, but just couldn't bring itself to do it. And today is, with the Charlie Hebdo types running the show over there in French culture, it is, I think we can safely say that the errors of Rousseau and of Voltaire are still certainly very prevalent amongst the thinkers in France, if there is any thinking going on in France.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, I mean that's exactly. I mean their only thinking is liberalism, which is sort of anti-thinking. But yeah. So today we're talking about the German idealists, and these are the guys who, in very large measure, paved the way for Nazism and communism, which people think are opposites, but they're really not. And in a way, they were a fulfillment of Hegel's concept of the dialectic, but in a way, they're not really opposites because they're both just different forms of socialism.
That's right. And if I may, before we get started, I'm going to bring us into the 20th century, and I'm going to introduce the audience to just one brief paragraph that will show that this method of thinking does not have to be entered into. It does not have to be engaged. You can fight it. And there have been very prominent Germans, or Austrians as it were, that did fight it and were actually, at the time of Hitler, had a little bit of, had some success. And of course, brother, you know I'm talking about Wilhelm Röpke.
Okay, the economist. Okay, yeah, sure.
Yeah, and after World War II, after the horrors of National Socialism, German National Socialism, which if you abbreviate it, that's how you get Nazism. Röpke was asked by the United States and by Great Britain and the Allied powers and the then makeshift government, which basically cobbled together by the victors of the war, to present a plan for German unification and for German for the Germans to get back to some form of a market economy. But to his credit, Röpke said, "Look, economics is not really what we have to recover from. We have to recover from communism. You guys don't get it." And communism is not just simply a form of economics, which most Americans still today tragically think it is. And just one paragraph from his book on a humane economy, brother. And this is how he introduced the spiritual and moral setting. One of the oversimplifications by which social rationalism distorts the truth is that communism is a weed particular to the marshes of poverty and capable of being eradicated by an improvement in the standard of living. This is a fatal misconception. Surely everyone must realize by now that the world war against communism cannot be won with radio sets, refrigerators, and widescreen films. Of course, you could say today widescreen televisions. It is not a contest for a better supply of goods. Unfortunately for the free world, whose record in this field cannot be beaten. The truth is, it is a profound, all-encompassing conflict of two ethical systems in the widest sense, a struggle for the very conditions of man's spiritual and moral existence. Not for one moment may the free world waver in its conviction that the real danger of communism, more terrible than the hydrogen bomb, brother, is the threat to wipe these conditions from the face of the earth. Anyone who rejects this ultimate apocalyptic perspective must be very careful, lest sooner or later, and perhaps for no worse reason than weakness or ignorance, he betray the greatest and highest values which mankind has ever had to defend. In comparison with this, everything else counts as nothing. Now that's a man that got it and saw that what we're about to discuss, what Kant and what Hegel and what Schopenhauer brought into being with their horrifically flawed thought, would engender and would lead to that state of thinking that, as Röpke points out, man, if you think this problem is just economic, then you're not a very good thinker, because this is not a problem of economics. It is.
So you're saying it's not the economy, stupid?
It's not the economy, stupid. So when we get to the end of our discussion, I hope that in a couple of weeks we'll be able to demonstrate this. But let's go back to the beginning, shall we? 18th century German philosophers. And I suppose that the king of all those, and you know far more about him than I, is Immanuel Kant. Brother?
Yeah, okay, so Immanuel Kant, his years were 1724 to 1778. So he's, all in the century that we're focusing on, the 18th century. His main works were the Critique of Pure Reason, the Critique of Practical Reason, and the Critique of Judgment. This is the philosopher as the critic, which is kind of a modern phenomenon. Now, Kant tried to reconcile two strains of modern thought that were considered irreconcilable. Kant tried to reconcile, and so it's important we harken back to whom we started with, which is Descartes. And Descartes is basically a rationalist in his philosophical approach. There is an a priorism in his thinking. All of his thinking is from a priori reasoning. Then you have another tendency of modern philosophy. So cogito ergo sum. That's all based upon a priori reasoning.
I think, therefore I am.
He starts in his own mind.
Right.
So you've got a priori reasoning, which is a part of the rationalism of the age of the so-called Enlightenment. Then you have an opposite tendency of the age of the Enlightenment, which we see among many of the scientists, many of whom also were philosophers, as we talked about. Hobbes and a lot of these guys were actually empirical scientists. They did experiments in laboratories and so forth. So for them, it was a priori meant absolutely nothing. They were anti-rationalists in a certain sense. For them, everything was observation. Everything was scientific observation, and therefore they are empiricists. Therefore, everything for them is a posteriori. Everything's based upon observation. So the rationalism and the empiricism of modern thought, which were sort of trends at loggerheads, as it were something that Immanuel Kant tried to reconcile. And you notice that all of this is in the question of epistemology. All of this is in the question of knowledge, which is really kind of the major thing that Kant is credited with, is his theory of knowledge. It's not the only thing. I mean, these German idealists, you got to give the Germans something. When they do it thoroughly. When they do it systematically. There's a certain thoroughness and methodicalness that German thinkers take to their task. You think of these guys and their philosophy as sort of like Wagner writing the Ring Cycle. I mean, there's something. There's an amazing capacity that they have for the exhaustive in their undertakings, or a Mahler symphony or something like that. Just big, huge, grandiose. Anyway, so Kant and the other German idealists in general got into basically every area of philosophy that we're going to cover in real philosophy, Philosophia Perennis. They get into logic. They get into ethics. They get into psychology of a sort. They get into various, all of the various disciplines of philosophy they're going to try to cover. But what Kant, I think, is most known for are two things: principally his epistemological system and his ethical system. So we can tackle those one at a time. So his epistemology, in other words, his theory of knowledge, is an attempt at modifying the radical and some would say sort of naive idealism of Bishop George Berkeley. Now Berkeley was his predecessor. He was in the early 18th century. Berkeley was, as we know, a Church of Ireland bishop, that is an Anglican Irishman bishop, who in Northern Ireland, who came up with some. He basically said that "Essayas percipi," that was his statement. To be is to be perceived.
Perceived, right?
So he absolutely full stop denied the reality of things outside of our minds, and he made our minds, rather than knowing faculties, he made of them creative faculties, things that, and I'm not using creative in an analogous sense. He made it so that we actually create our own realities, and only when something is perceived then does it exist. Now, the German idealists thought this was way too unsophisticated. This was way too simplistic, and therefore, I mean, aside from the fact that it's it's stupid and it defies all common sense. And if Berkeley had lived day to day as if he thought that, he would have been put in an asylum.
Brother, can I just interject? I can illustrate this with a story that Brother Francis told us about the day that Berkeley was finished saying the Mass, and it was raining outside, and he went through the procession as the priest does, so he'd be the first one out, and he could greet the parishioners when they left. And instead of going outside, he stood in the vestibule. And it was raining, and one of the young men there, or the servers that had kind of studied Berkeley's philosophy there, wanted to know why he stopped. And Berkeley said, "Well, son, because it's raining out there." And the young man, and you should go over to the rectory and go get me an umbrella. And the young man said, "Why do I need to go get you an umbrella? Isn't the rain just in your head?"
Yeah. That's a funny story, and as brother pointed out, the Greek philosophers, when they actually lived according to their idiosyncrasies, and that's why they live out in the woods and they were like hermits, and the pre-Socratic Greek philosophers who had these weird ideas, they would actually live like madmen in the woods,
right?
And people sort of appreciated them. These modern guys, they get high-paying jobs in academia, and they just sort of they're hypocrites. But so Kant actually tried to modify that say raw, naked kind of idealism of the Englishman or the Irish. He was really an Englishman. Berkeley. So Berkeley. So we'll set him aside, not talk about him anymore. Now we're talking about Kant. Kant comes up with a very convoluted system of identifying reality as it is, which he calls the noumena, which is also called in German das Ding an sich, the thing in itself. So there's the thing in itself, and then there is what we perceive, and that is the phenomenon. That is the phenomena. So you've got the phenomenon is plural, the phenomenon and the noumenon, or the phenomena and the noumena, to be consistent in the plural. We cannot know, according to Kant, the Ding an sich. We cannot know the thing in itself. All we can know is the experience of the thing. So everything that we know must be something that we experience. And everything, which, by the way, and of course for him, experience is defined in something of a materialistic way. Therefore, his principles are fundamentally opposed to any concept of God. And later authors, later German idealists, guys who actually believed in Kant's principles, struggled with this. And they were Protestants mostly, some were Catholic. They struggled with this, and they came up with critiques of Kant, and they tried to insert some outlet for having God in Kant's system. One of these guys is Schleiermacher, who's going to provide the philosophical underpinnings for what we Catholics call modernism. In other words, not the general movement of errors in modernity, but the very specific heresy condemned by that name, under that name, by Pope Pius the Tenth, Saint Pius X. So Schleiermacher is an important figure, but Kant starts with these principles that are utterly antithetical to Christianity, utterly antithetical really to any theistic system of belief, because you can only know anything in as much as you experience it. But the thing is, you cannot know the thing in itself. So reality itself is always elusive. All that we can know is what we experience of it. So he doesn't deny the existence of reality. Others do this. Other German idealists came on later and said, no. People said that Kant was wrong on various fronts. For some of them, he was way too moderate. And some of them said, well, why posit that there even is a Ding an sich? Why posit that there even is a thing that exists in reality? Why posit that there is a noumena and not just that there are phenomena that we see? So in a way, it's weird. In a way, he's kind of considered conservative within his own radical element of,
That's a laugh.
of German idealism, supposed transcendental idealism. And remember, for Kant, this is to reconcile two strains of thought, of continental thought, two strains of modern philosophy, the a priorism of the rationalists like Descartes and company, and the empiricism of the empiricists, like all those guys who just for them science was everything, and observation in a laboratory and so forth. So this is his theory of knowledge. Now, an awful lot could be said about it, but it's so important because what he lays the foundation of. He lays the foundation of a whole series of further permutations of this concept, which bring us to some of the radical ideas of Hegel, and then beyond Hegel, Marx, and we get lots of people dead from these ideas.
That's
Ultimately,
right.
for him, the truth there is he didn't deny that there's something of an objective reality, but he so emphasized the subjective. He so emphasized the subjective that that's really all you can know. So how can I tell you something about reality? All I can tell you is my experience of reality.
So this is the way to kind of explain this and to flesh this out so that the audience could see how this might apply, and maybe how, if Kant were around today, heaven forfend, that he might give an example. The old adage, brother, if a tree falls in the wood, does it make a sound? If no one is there to hear it. Well, the philosopher says, well, of course it makes a sound. It doesn't matter if I'm there to hear it. If it falls and it's in the natural world, it makes a concussion, bam, it makes a sound. Well, you know, the philosopher, the Kantian philosopher says, well, no, because no one is there to perceive it. If no one is there to perceive it, then there's no perceiver, then there's no tree. And it wouldn't matter what difference does it make if it fell?
Well, I think that Kant would actually be something of an agnostic on the question, because he would tell you that all he can know is his experience.
So he wouldn't even know if the tree fell.
Well, I mean, if he saw a tree falling and it made a sound, he would know he would know the phenomena. He would say, I grant you the phenomena. I grant you that I perceived a tree falling and I perceived that it made a sound. But is that what really happened? Is that what really happened? And he would say, I don't know, because I don't know the Ding an sich. I don't know reality as it is. I don't know the noumena. I don't know the thing that's really there.
So if we interject now what I say constantly on the radio show and what we'll hear tomorrow night during our philosophy course, that what is truth? Truth is conformity of the mind to reality. The reality is that the tree did fall. It doesn't matter what Kant thinks about it or what Kant thinks his brain thinks about it. The tree fell. The reality is that reality requires us to say that the tree fell. And we were standing close enough and we heard it. It did make a sound. But in the absence of us being here, and I think, and we're going to take a break here, brother, but I think this is where the SAS percipe comes in, that being is being perceived, right? And we studied this in really deep, in great detail in our philosophy course, which is why it makes a lot of sense to me. Which is why I just want to, for people that aren't taking the philosophy course, I just want to kind of explain to them what it is, to try to put it not just as a theory, but okay, well, here's how you might try and explain the theory, and here's how Kant might try and explain the theory. And I found this interesting, brother, just to wrap this segment up on the German philosophers. The Germans were wrong. Last week the French were wrong. Now the Germans were wrong. This is from the Cambridge University Press in 2002. Gentleman that goes by the name of Terry Pinkard wrote a book about German philosophers in a couple of volumes. First volume is German Philosophy, 1760 to 1860, The Legacy of Idealism, which is exactly what you said, but he said it as a secularist. So you two arrived at the same conclusion, which is shocking. Here's what he wrote. Here's the abstract of the book, brother, just one part of it. In the second half of the 18th century, German philosophy came for a while to dominate European philosophy. It changed the way in which not only Europeans, but people all over the world conceived of themselves and thought about nature, religion, human history, politics, and the structure of the human mind. In this rich and wide-ranging book, Terry Pinkard, blah, 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 blah. That's a pretty accurate, I mean, that's bold in what it says, but it's accurate, though, isn't it, brother? It did change the way people thought.
Oh, absolutely, and it's still quite with us. There's no question. It's still with us. I mean, I remember being in seminary, getting in an argument with a fellow seminarian who comes right out and starts turning Kant. He starts regurgitating Kant all over me, and he actually came out and said, "You cannot know reality as it is," because phenomena and noumena and all that. I mean, that's how he said it. I couldn't believe it. This guy, he's probably, God help us, he's probably a priest now, preaching heresy someplace.
Well, with that, we shall take our first time out. He is Brother Andre Marie of the St. Augustine Institute. Brother, please stand by. We'll be right back with more of this fascinating conversation about the Germans were wrong. This is all part of our series here, folks, which goes all the way back, as I said, to late July of last year. The modern wrong world made right. Now, we have to tell you how the modern wrong world is before we can make it right. Brother's already doing a great job of telling you how to make it right with his show, Reconquest, which you can hear every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. East, right here on the Veritas Radio Network Crusade channel. If you miss any part of any of these episodes of the Modern Wrong World Made Right, please consider joining us on the Veritas Radio Network and the Crusade channel and becoming a Founders Pass member, an official paying member, and that will gain you access to all of the features that we have produced in this series and much, much more, including the Mike Church Show, the Mark Kreslin Show, My Story of America, the Constitution Hour with Professor Gutzman, and much, much more. Find the sign-up forms today at mikechurch.com/join, or just go to veritasradionetwork.com. We'll be right back with segment 2 of this episode of The Modern Wrong World, made right here on the Veritas Radio Network Crusade channel. Welcome back. This is segment 2 of our 5th episode, I believe. The Modern Wrong World Made Right. The modernists were wrong. Today we are studying the German modernists, beginning with Immanuel Kant. This is the Veritas Radio Network and the Crusade channel. I am your co-host today, Mike Church, and am joined by my friend and colleague and a fellow host here on the Crusade channel, Brother Andre Marie, who is at the St. Augustine Institute in Richmond, New Hampshire. Brother, I always have to ask you, how's the weather? Because you and I are about 1,500, almost as far apart as you could be, north and south in the United States, and still be in the United States.
It's crazy, Mike. It's actually raining outside, and it got up to 50 or 52. So it's nuts. And this is after we had a super hard freeze, and it was 15 below zero on our porch the other day.
I saw that it was up near the Hudson Bay It was the Bay of Manitoba, whichever one is the big one up there. It was minus 51. Minus 51. So we began last episode, we began to touch on the philosophy of Immanuel Kant. And the same dictionary that I was referring to earlier has this little summary about Kant. A central aspect of Kant's philosophical project during his critical period was to set metaphysics on the secure path of a science. This was meant to be achieved by developing and defending transcendental idealism, a view that is largely motivated by considerations pertaining to the ideality of space and time. Now, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know where that wound up, now do you?
Yeah, I mean, it ends up denying. How can you have a metaphysics when you think we can't know the thing as it is? So metaphysics is the study of being. How can you study being if you're not certain of what being is, except in as much as you can experience it? And you're not sure that what you're experiencing actually is what is. That's a problem.
You sound like Bill Clinton,
Then it becomes just a matter of being consistent with your own ideas.
Right.
And these guys wrote a lot. I mean, Kant was a personally very ascetical person. He was a hard worker. He spent long hours philosophizing. He wrote, large tomes, and he was a very methodical person. But it's all in his head. I mean, then this is very much a modern disease, is to put reality all in one's head.
Yeah, but
they're touching upon his metaphysics, which,
right,
I mean,
right.
he really doesn't have a metaphysics. You can't have a metaphysics if you have his epistemology. Because once you deny that you can actually know reality, how can you study it?
So
you speak of it.
So was Bill Clinton a Kantian then when he said that depends on what your definition of is?
Well, I think he was a hedonist politician, and that's different. It's a slightly different category.
But he didn't know what is was either.
No. Now, we talked about Kant's epistemology, but we really have to, before we move on to Hegel, we should talk about Kant's ethics. Because this is also a massive contribution of Kant to the modern wrong world. He's one of I'm going to read you a passage from a Catholic philosopher who's very worthy of respect, a gentleman by the name of Edward Fesser.
Okay.
He has his own blog, and he's written some books on scholastic philosophy. And again, his name is Ed Fesser, and he's talking about Kant's idea of autonomy. Now, this is very, very important. Keep in mind what autonomy means. Pneumos is the Greek word for law, and auto meaning self. So to have autonomy is literally to be self-governing.
Okay.
So, an anarchist is an antinomian, somebody without a law, okay, opposed to all law, without a law. But autonomy is self-governing. When we say that something is autonomous, we say it governs itself. It's got there's no hierarchy over it, no law over it. So, the antinomian, or rather the autonomian categories of Immanuel Kant have been so imbibed by modern man that we tend to think in these categories. Kant was, in a sense, a radical individualist. And it kind of makes sense when you think of his epistemology,
okay.
Right?
Right.
We can't know reality as it is. All we know is what's in our noodles, huh? All we know is what we have personally experienced. Therefore, I can only judge things by my experience. I govern myself by my experience. The phenomena that I can know, this is what governs me. And it becomes intensely individualistic. Now, this is what Ed Fesser has to say. Sorry, I don't know him well enough to call him Ed. Edward Fesser has to say.
Okay.
He says that Kant's categories have also permeated contemporary Catholic and Protestant thought. Modern people of all political and religious persuasions have come to see, quote, respect for persons, quote, human rights, quote, human dignity, quote, freedom, and such like, rather than, say, submission to the natural law or to the will of God, as the fundamental categories in terms of which to address moral and political issues. To this extent, we are all Kantians now.
Right.
So this is from a posting that Edward Fesser has on his blog with the peculiar name something about, oh, I lost it, drat, something about that strange spider. Okay. He's actually quoting Nietzsche. Nietzsche called Kant a spider. Why, I really don't know, but he I think because Kant got into every single different aspect of modern thought, and Nietzsche didn't particularly like Kant. So he called him that catastrophic spider.
Well, but if there's no Kant, there probably is no Nietzsche, though, right?
Well, I mean, all these guys are sort of reacting against each other. So I mean, you get these dialectics going, which we'll talk about soon when we get to Hegel. But edwardfesser.blogspot.com, or just Google Edward Fesser, and you'll come up with you can find a posting. Search for it on his site called "The Catastrophic Spider."
Okay,
and it's a great little critique of Kant, particularly Kantian ethics. Which is all quite messed up, and
but how can you have ethics, though, brother? Because now Aristotle writes the book on ethics, the first book that we can use and turn to about ethics, and then St. Thomas comes along and he adds the Christian element to ethics, and this element is still, I think, worthy of all of our consideration and worthy of all of our study. You said something when Fesser was when Fesser was describing Kant, though, about, you get your freedom and your human rights and all this, and then your human dignity, and your I have my liberty, and you've got to accord me my liberties, etc., etc. And he said, as opposed to conforming your mind to the natural law and something about the order of things. And I guess that or conformment, which I take to mean that there is a eternal law. It's been handed down to us going all the way back to the days of Moses. We can know it. Can we know it? Can we repeat it? Yes. So we can communicate it to others. And if we conformed our behavior and the way we treat others, and certainly the way we treat God, because Fesser also said acknowledgement of God.
The will of God, yeah.
Yeah, the will of God. Acknowledging the will of God. I mean, the will of God is the highest thing that you can serve. That's the point of ethics, is you can do all you want for mankind. If you're doing things for mankind and you're doing them against the will of God, you're in big trouble. And that's where these guys, is one thing they all have in common. They all stray off in that direction with different fits of silliness, and we'll get to this later. With Darwin, it's, what's the origin of the species. With Freud, it's everything. Well, every man is conceived of, and every man is, every thought revolves around, sex, Freudian slips, etc. These are all just mutations of the same error, aren't they?
Well, I mean, I don't want to oversimplify it. I mean, they all have the same error in as much as they reject tradition. They all have the same error in as much as they reject sound common sense. So yeah, they all have that in common. But of course, they're going to fight on everything else. Regarding Kantian ethics, the problem with autonomy, of course, is that once you introduce it, you're not going to have an ordered society. Because you're going to have anarchy, because everybody's going to think he's asserting his own will. Everybody is self-governing. So how can somebody govern me if I am self-governing?
That's right.
And what you then have to have is a system in place. Now, what he said is that we all have we're all part of I'm forgetting the term that he had. Each of us is an end in ourselves. Each man is an end in himself. And ultimately, the ultimate error of Kant is this. You said, how can you have an ethics in that system? Well, I will tell you how he arrived at this. If you reject God, you will deify something. All of us have a God. All of us have a God. Your God could be your belly. Your God could be your libido. Your God could be your bank account. Your God could be the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, hopefully. Your God could be any number of different things. I mean, Fester actually points this out elsewhere on his website very intelligently. People think that idolatry is a dead thing. He says, no, we live in the most idolatrous age since the dawn of creation. We live in an incredibly idolatrous age. Men have made all sorts of false gods. But ultimately, Kant deifies man, and he doesn't deify man the way God wants man deified by grace. He deifies man by making him autonomous, self-governing. So if you have lots of self-governing beings, then how do you maintain order? You have to have totalitarianism.
That's right.
You have to have the big statism. You have to have Nazism or communism or something like that.
And now we're with Hobbes.
What's that?
And now we're back at Hobbes. We had to have Leviathan.
Yeah. I mean, you need all these things interrelate. I mean, believe me, they all make for a yucky soup when you blend it all together. And then now, if you don't mind, because I know we don't have a lot of time left, we should talk about Hegel now.
Please do.
Because okay, so he's another German idealist, and he inherited Kant's thought, but his sort of unique contribution to the German idealistic school, if you can't call it a school, but to the general movement known as German idealism, his contribution is that pure abstract thoughts, such as what Immanuel Kant had put in his formulations, was something that ultimately leads to unsolvable contradictions. And to overcome the shortcomings that are in Kant's system, Hegel introduces something of a social element and the integral importance of two things. First, history, and this is very important, or it's huge, as Trump would say. And then he introduces the other. In other words, another person, other beings in society. Keep in mind, Kant was kind of antisocial in a way. His thinking was antisocial. Hegel's was not. So for me to come into self-consciousness, I depend upon the other. Why? Because it's only by interacting with another that I formulate my ideas. And this is the root of what we call Hegelianism, which is a dialectical kind of thought. And we should pause a little bit here to appreciate the fact that 19th century thinking, now Hegel's years were from 1770 to 1831. So his years overlapped with Kant. Kant died in 1778. So Hegel was an 8-year-old when Kant died.
Okay. So
he inherited a lot of that same thought from German idealism, the earlier phase of German idealism. And what he does is he pushes it to the sort of social dimension, but then he gets into history, and he starts talking about knowledge being something dialectical. Knowledge is something of a process whereby, and to use Hegel's own vocabulary, in my own thinking and in the thinking of the world and in the development of society and the development of humanity, we begin with the thesis. And the thesis is some purported statement of truth, some effort at grasping the Ding an sich, the thing as it is. And then I have my other come along, another person, the other person who's with me in society. And he comes along and he says, no, I beg to differ. The sky is not blue, it's actually gray. So then the two of us argue it out, huh? And then a synthesis is born. Instead of the sky being blue or gray, the sky is now officially blue-gray. And that synthesis of two opposing conceptions, two opposing ideas, blue and gray,
Okay.
that synthesis itself becomes a new thesis.
Wow. Now we just
And
keep
then
making theses.
now, this will go on, Hegel says, till the end of the world. We have to pause here to appreciate something. What Hegel does in the mind, and in metaphysics and in epistemology and in theory of knowledge, as well as in his theory of reality, what he does there, Charles Darwin does in biology, and Karl Marx does in economics. So for all these guys, history is very important. Not a proper understanding of history as you and I would get it, would understand it. Not a proper outlook on history as you and I would appreciate. But for them, history is this long march towards the omega point. They're essentially progressivists. Everything is in evolution to something better. And this is something that all of the moderns, I mean, Hitler and Stalin would both have appreciated this. Both of them appreciated Darwin, and both of them would have appreciated, to some degree anyway, Hegel's thought. Now, Karl Marx considered himself one of the young Hegelians, one of the young disciples of Hegel. Only he completely repudiated idealism. The idealism is basically the importance of ideas over matter. In fact, he didn't believe in idealism at all. He considered himself a materialist. Metaphysically, he's the very opposite of an idealist. He's a materialist. But what Marx did, he took Hegel's process of thesis, antithesis, synthesis, and he applied it to materialism. And he also took Hegel's tremendous importance that he put upon history and progress in history through the dialectical process. And guess what he called it? The class struggle.
The class struggle. Brother, you're going to have to hold that thought because we are completely out of time. Folks, I believe that will do it for this episode of the Modern Wrong World Made Right. Brother, we'll come back. We'll have maybe 30 seconds to say goodbye. Set up next week's episode. We'll be right back here on the Crusade Channel.
Special pricing for Crusade Channel listeners. Call 866-595-2381. That's 866-595-2381. Or visit bucksteel.com.
Buck Steel and the Crusade Channel. Building the... Okay, brother, we have just about a minute to wrap this up. I would like to have heard some more about Hegel. Maybe we should extend Hegel into next week before we get into wrapping it all up and showing the errors of the Germans and the French in separate episodes. What do you think?
I don't know that I want to talk about Hegel that much.
Okay, so then next week we'll get into the French and how do we apply the French erroneous philosophical thinking and then show you what came about as a result of it. How about that for next week?
All right. Sounds good, Mike.
Okay, so for Brother Andre Marie and for all of us here on the Crusade Channel, this is Mike Church saying so long. See you again next week for another episode of The Modern Wrong World Made Right here on the Veritas Radio Network and the Crusade Channel. Okay, brother, we can move on next week.
Okay. Okay, that sounds good.
Yeah.
Mike.
I didn't mean that I wanted to hear more Hegel. I was
No, I know,
intrigued by
what you mean.
hearing
I know what you
about
mean.
Hegel.
I just thought I'd make light of it. That's all.
So, to prepare for next week, I'm going to re-listen to there's a three or four part lecture series that Michael Davies did on the French Revolution. They're really good, and he goes all the way back to the beginning, like in the 1760s and stuff. As what the setup was, what came about to make it all possible, and it really was. I mean, it really did come about with Louis what was he, the 14th, or was he the 16th?
16th.
Louis the 16th, kind of being lukewarm for a long enough period of time to give Robespierre and the boys just enough of a window of opportunity to wreak Hades on the earth. Because by all indications, everything that I read and I've seen about it, Marie Antoinette didn't seem like she was lukewarm.
No.
But Louis was.
I mean, the Bourbons were their own worst enemies. They had a very highly centralized government, which itself was kind of problematic. Godfrey Kurth, the Catholic historian, argues that statism, the kind of statism that these monarchs in this era practiced, with highly centralized governments, it led to revolution, because revolution is the only outlet to break it. He's not for revolution.